Hey budding herbalists, I'm Maria Noel Groves, owner of Wintergreen Botanicals and author of Body into Balance and Grow Your Own Herbal Remedies. Today we're going to do a quick video showing you how to make herbal vinegars. This is a really easy, versatile type of remedy to make that you can do for medicinal purposes, you can do for culinary purposes, or you can use for a lot of other things, including skincare, preparations, topical, cleaning. There are really so many different ways to use vinegar. And when I survey students, vinegars tend to rank kind of low on the preference list of all the different remedies that we make in class. And I'm a little bit disappointed because vinegars have a lot of advantages in herbal medicine making. They are, while they're not quite as good of a solvent and good as a preservative as alcohol would be or a tincture, they are pretty good. They're one of our more shelf-stable. They're one of our better extraction techniques for something that is relatively shelf-stable that you can use fresh plants or dry plants. And then vinegar also has its own healing properties. If you're consuming vinegar, especially something like an apple cider vinegar or some other more kind of unpasteurized holistic vinegar, it's going to help lower blood pressure when used regularly. It can lower the glycemic index of foods that are consumed at the same time, like even things like if you eat a bowl of rice and you put some vinegar on it, the sugar effect of that in the body is a little bit less, actually a relatively substantial amount less. And then it also has some blood sugar balancing and blood sugar lowering properties on its own, in addition to what it does to the other carbohydrate-rich foods that you might be eating at the same time. And it also will kick up digestive juices, which is one of the good things about vinegar. It also could potentially be one of the downsides to vinegar. If you happen to have a sort of acidic digestive system, vinegar might be a little too harsh for that, and you might need to add a little honey to it to soften it, which would also make it taste a little bit better but shorten the shelf life. That's called an oxymel. Or you may just need to use a different preparation of medicine making altogether. You can add vinegars to foods and it'll add just a little bit of splash of that little bit of acidity, brightens the flavor of other foods. You can make marinades with them. You can make salad dressings with them. Because they're so much more shelf stable, I prefer to make herbal vinegars and then just add it to regular olive oil versus making an herbal olive oil that I want to use for culinary purposes, because the likelihood of an herbal infused oil going bad is very high. There's a very high chance for things like botulism and microbes that you might not want to be consuming in an oil that's sitting for a long time, whereas vinegar, that's very low. So it's easier to do those with that. And then these will keep for pretty long time, usually 1 year, 2 years. They might even keep for 3 years, but some of the flavors and the colors might dissipate with time, might not be quite as medicinally viable or as as enjoyable as a flavor. And there's even a whole new movement around cocktails and mocktails to use herbal vinegars, which might be called shrubs, which usually involve a little bit of a sweetener agent along with herb or fruit and your vinegar, and using that as a flavoring agent in alcoholic cocktails as well as non-alcoholic mocktails. And so there's a lot that you can play around with here. Topically, it's very balancing for the skin. It'll help fight off microbes, but then it also, you could use it as like for a stinky feet dip or something like that. But you could also use it to help rebalance the pH of the skin, of the acid mantle of the skin. You can use it as a hair rinse. It'll make the hair kind of shiny. You do get a little bit of a vinegary smell, but usually that smell is going to subside as time goes on, and once it evaporates, you usually don't have too much of that salad dressing smell. And you could add some essential oils or some aromatic herbs to your vinegars to help cover up some of that vinegary aroma. So lots and lots and lots of things that you can do with vinegar, and it's very inexpensive. It's alcohol free. It's safe for almost anybody as long as you can handle the acidity of vinegar, and you can just do so much. So you can make a medicinal vinegar, and that would be very similar to making a tincture. And we have a whole nother video and a set of class notes on making tinctures. And so you'd follow the same instructions, except that instead of using alcohol, you use vinegar. Usually apple cider vinegar would be the vinegar of choice for that. And then you're gonna wanna make sure to use plastic caps and plastic lids, because vinegar will corrode metal over time. And even in a short period of time, you'll get little black dust of metal bits inside of your vinegar, which you really don't want. And then it will even corrode your rubber dropper bottles over time as well. So you could use a small dropper bottle for low doses of things here and there, but normally if you're going to be doing longer term storage, you want to use a plastic cap, or maybe you might use some other material, but usually plastic is the preferred lid, and then you can use glass for the container itself. So I've repurposed various little salad dressing bottles that I store a lot of my vinegars with, and I like having them clear to show off the color, but then I will store store them in a dark pantry so that that protects them, because the light will certainly degrade the color over time if they're exposed. So we're going to do a culinary vinegar today using purple basil, which comes out a beautiful color. And for culinary vinegars, you don't necessarily need to use as much plant material as you would for a medicinal vinegar, but the principles are basically the same. So I have my nice little basket of herb, and I'm going to put it in my jar. I've got a nice little mason jar here with a plastic lid, and I'm just going to chop it up coarsely. This is very similar to the starting process for making a fresh plant tincture. You don't have to pulverize them, but you do want to chop them up a little bit to release some of those aromas and some of those colors. And I love purple basil because it just turns this beautiful kind of purpley magenta color. This here is a chive blossom vinegar, which turns pink, and that's another favorite of mine, and it has a nice oniony flavor, whereas this will taste more basil-y. But the colors do fade as time goes on, so the chive blossom vinegar will turn a little bit more of a light pink color, and the purple basil will also kind of turn just a little bit more mellow of a color as time goes on. But it should last for pretty close to a year before you see much color change. So I'm going to somewhat loosely pack the herb jar. You know, there's really, whether you pack or you do it loosely, it'll just be a slight difference in color and flavor. And for the culinary herbs, it's really up to you. I don't usually make very big batches, because while I love culinary vinegars and herbal vinegars, I don't use a lot of them. So I just make little jars, like this is a little 8-ounce jar. That's more than enough. And you can make even smaller jars than that if you're just practicing, because, you know, all these ingredients cost money. And if you want to save money, you should start with small quantities, see what you like, and then make bigger quantities once you know that you love it and that you go through it really quickly. So you got that in there. Got plenty of plant material. It's going to turn nice and purple. And because I want to show off the color and the flavor, but especially the color of this particular one, I'm going to use an organic distilled white vinegar. You can use any white vinegar that has a nice flavor to it. So you can use distilled white vinegar, and I would only use organic if you're going to go with distilled white vinegar for consumption, because cheap distilled white vinegar is really nasty tasting. It's very heavily processed, and they can be made from some not so desirable ingredients. Spectrum generally makes theirs with sugar beets, although it can change from batch to batch as far as what their source is, and they're organic, and it usually tastes decent for a white vinegar. This is kind of the less expensive. Organic costs more than non-organic, but distilled white vinegar costs a lot less than, say, white rice vinegar, white wine vinegar, champagne vinegar. Those would be even better options for doing this than a distilled white vinegar, but I'm keeping my costs low, and so I tend to work with this one here. And so we're just going to cover that up with our vinegar. I am a sucker for color, so not all my vinegars are pretty colors. Some of them just taste good, but I do really like the ones that are pretty. So I like my purple basil vinegar that turns nice and magenta. I have bronze fennel, which interestingly, if you make a glycerin extract, it's going to turn it a little bit on the purple side. But if you make a vinegar extract, it's a little bit more of a reddish color as opposed to the more magenta purple of the purple basil. But really lovely, and fennel is really tasty, has a little bit of a sweet flavor. I love it with beet salads and things like that, whereas I might use the purple basil for things where I want that Italian basil flavor, and I don't mind a little purple color in there. Dill, you can use dill seeds, dill heads, dill fronds, and a lot of times I like to do that one just with plain old apple cider vinegar, and that's really yummy. If you're a pickle fan, a little bit of dill vinegar, you just have a little bit of it before you eat, and it stimulates digestion and helps ease gas and bloating, and it's really quite yummy in its own kind of way. Stevia tastes really, really sweet, and so you can infuse that in either type of vinegar and then use that in recipes where you might want to make a sweet tasting marinade or sweet tasting salad dressing but not actually have any sugar in it. It tastes a little bit like sweet pickles when it's got in the vinegar, and then you can add it to other ingredients as well. You can either make a blend with stevia in it, or you can take your stevia vinegar and make a recipe with that. Tarragon is really classic. It's got a little bit of a fennel flavor with a little bit of bite to it. The species name for tarragon actually means like little dragon because it's got a little bit of a bite and makes your tongue a little numb when you have a fresh one, but there's definitely some sweetness there, and that tastes really lovely in a good quality white vinegar, and is a very classic ingredient in French cuisine to just add a little pop of flavor to a soup or a stew or a dressing at the very end. And here are just some examples of some pretty colored ones that I love to use in the kitchen. This is that chive blossom vinegar that I just made earlier in the season using the pink flowers of your regular chives. I also make a chive blossom vinegar with the regular garlic chives that are white, and they don't come out any special color, but because of their garlicky flavor, they taste a little bit like kosher pickles as well, because kosher pickles usually have dill and garlic in them. So both those flavors kind of are reminiscent of pickles. If you do actual garlic bulbs, sometimes there's a chemical reaction that occurs with the vinegar that's totally safe. You can still consume it, but it turns Mediterranean, like Mediterranean teal blue. It's amazing. It looks really wild, and it's totally safe to consume, and you can play around with those colors as well. And then this is a fire cider that has things like garlic and onions and hot peppers, ginger, horseradish, all sorts of pungent things, but then I've added some turmeric to it as well, which is what's giving it that nice pretty golden color. And I also added a little bit of cinnamon and a little bit of lemongrass. So this is my Thai red curry style fire cider, and this you can make salad dressings with. I love to make all sorts of salad dressings and Thai little chili pepper seasonings dressings, and I'll mix it with other ingredients like sriracha or maple syrup or mustard and make really yummy little toppings to throw on recipes. So I mostly use this for cooking, but a lot of people just take a spoonful of it when they feel like they're coming down with something or for general heart health, and it just gets everything moving. It's a good wintertime remedy when it's cold and damp, and we use these hot pungent herbs to just warm things up. So those are just a few of them, but you can also make any kind of medicinal herb in a vinegar, especially those mineral-rich ones like nettles. You can do fresh or dry, and I would generally use the apple cider vinegar for that. And you could do holy basil. You could do almost any herb would do just fine in a vinegar. It just might not be quite as potent as a tincture, but it's still a good viable way to work with something. Motherwort is a plant that's really best fresh, and so if you didn't want to use an alcohol extract, you could do an herbal vinegar of it, or you could do a herbal oxymel. Motherwort's not that great tasting anyway, so it would be one of those get it over quick kind of herbs, but it does have a lot of healing properties, so you'll still enjoy it. So that's pretty much how to make your herbal vinegar. Later on, when it's time to strain it out, you strain it out the same way you would when you're making herbal oils and herbal tinctures. We demonstrate that more in the tincture class, but you just put it through a cloth and squeeze it out, or you can put it through a strainer and push it out. Just be aware that if the vinegar stays around metal for any length of time, it will rust and corrode. So you want to use a good quality stainless steel strainer and then rinse it out really well and then wash it really well after use. So if it just has a quick exposure, it's usually okay. But if you just left it sitting in it, or you were using a cheap strainer that wasn't dishwasher safe and wasn't a really good quality stainless steel, straining your vinegars out would eventually corrode that metal and it would start to rust. So be aware, be very careful with metal and vinegars, but plastic, glass, great to use, and really fun way to work with your herbs in a variety of different ways. So have some fun with it, play around, see what cool colors and flavors you can get, what nice medicine, and happy herbal adventures.